What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? You are listening to the Data is My Science podcast, the show that makes data your passion. I am your host, Dapper Data. Today, I have a special guest on here. Today, his name is Rama Ryali. I will dive deeper into his background. I'm telling you right now, you do not want to miss this podcast. We're going to talk about something we've never talked about before. Okay, data mesh and data democratization. All right, these are two important topics, right? If you haven't heard of data mesh, we're talking about that approach to being able to build that decentralized data architecture out there. And then data democratization, all right, we're really talking about the ability for information in that digital format to be accessible to the average end user. And I think it's important that we understand both of these terms wholeheartedly. We're going to dive into that. Raman, thank you for being on the podcast. Say hello to everybody.
Hey, Bobby, and everyone on the channel. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah. So Rama is very influential. He's been an innovative person within the IT industry, and he's highly accomplished within the data solutions industry as well. He has over 25 years of experience driving strategy and technology across many enterprise initiatives with a track record of leveraging tech investments of data solutions. Rama has been that go-to leader that everybody needs to go to. All right, he needs to, you need to make sure that Rama is in your circle and you need to follow him. I promise you. Rama is now the VP of a company that we'll talk about in a few. All right. And he's talking about what's happening in data lakehouse, right? Data mesh and data observability. So thank you again, Rama, for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you joining in.
Thank you for having me, Bobby, again. Much appreciated.
So Rama, so you are the VP of a company that's called Get that's called Right Data. All right. If you and I think it's important to understand exactly what you're doing with that company as well. And if you're able to do that, like this company right here is doing some amazing things. I know you shared a white paper with me before, and I just want to talk about what the role is playing in technology today, if possible.
Yeah, so I'll just tell who Right Data is to get us started, right? Right Data, we are a data software company, and we build software that empowers and unified data teams uh, through a modern data platform. And the name of that platform is Dextrus,
Okay.
Dextrus. And our commitment is to bring in data quality focus also through another tool called RDT. And to add more value to it, we also have a machine learning studio and a data wrangler built into the Dexter's platform. I think all in all, as we are the right data, we enable the data ops methodology to our data through our data engineering platform and combined with data quality. So you have the potent mix.
No, that I mean that is important, right? Data quality, what you said right there is important because a lot of times I think that as organizations, as individuals, we're presenting this data to even algorithms, right? I'm doing a huge piece right now. I'm getting my PhD in data science, and I am sitting there trying to understand how this algorithm is making this decision, right? For individuals, maybe venture capitalists, maybe financial industries, things like that, right? But sometimes we're getting mad at or getting upset at the algorithm, maybe if we're being biased or something like that. But really, the data is the biased stuff, right? Really, the quality of the data is not there. So we have to take it a step further back, right, to something like that where that quality of the data is very important. Um, so so I want to touch on data mesh too, right? What is it? The importance of it, the future of it, because when we talk about data mesh, I work at NetApp as we talked about before, and that is a huge topic in the industry right now, especially the government industry, financial industry, healthcare systems. All those public sector groups. I am hearing a lot about data mesh, right? That's like this buzzword going around almost, right? We talk about buzzwords, and from my understanding, and please help me with this, Rama, is that data meshes really provide that solution for those shortcomings of data lakes, if you will, by allowing like this greater autonomy and flexibility for the data owners. And it's a what is it? It's I've talked they've talked about that Eric Evans theory of being able to talk about that domain-driven design that's out there,
Yep.
right? So it's all about that domain, right? Can you talk a little bit more about data mesh and what that means?
Yeah, so I really want to make a connection to the audience to that same context of data quality, right? Let's start there
Mm-hmm.
first. So one of the bigger challenges in any enterprise is bringing trust in data, which is nothing but keeping the data pristine to the point where it's usable, data quality at the top notch, your critical assets, you can closely guard them. So when you go back into that conversation you started with, you have a machine learning thing you're working on, and the problem is the data, right? What people
Mm-hmm.
forget is technology teams, though they shepherd, they steward the data as it comes into the lake house and all those great places,
Mm-hmm.
right? Data warehouse in the cloud and everything. The problem surfaces in the data warehouse, but the challenge is it's not something the data teams can fix themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the data mesh connection comes to play. So when you
Mm-hmm.
look at the evolution of all the great things happening in data, right? We had Kimball's, Inman's, data walls, and all the great stuff
Mm-hmm.
happening. Then you have data mesh coming in, and when you see the promise of data mesh, it is how do we bring that improvement to quality, knowing the problem is way upstream, right? The problem
Mm-hmm.
is way upstream. It is where the business domains, as you call them, like the CRM systems, the ERP systems, the sales systems, all the other applications that feed in information to the enterprise, that's
Mm-hmm.
where the data problems start, right?
It's
Whether
like
the
the
problem,
edge, right?
it is, it's at the edge. I mean, as the
Mm-hmm.
information comes into the enterprise, if the emphasis can be put into improving data quality, all the things that happen downstream, which is going into the lakehouse, the data warehouse, the analytics, the machine learning, I would
Mm-hmm.
say 80% of them safely. Of course, the other 20% could fall in because of someone did a wrong coding. That can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Engineers are smart people, but engineers are human beings. They make mistakes. So are data scientists and everyone, right? So I
Right.
think where the data mesh gets EU into is how do I take the problem that is here upstream so I can solve it at the source of the problem? And that's when the whole concept of domain ownership comes. Now, if you're a business owner, if you're a
Mm-hmm.
domain owner of finance, what the data mesh is saying, my friend, you own it. You know better than anyone in the enterprise your data. So you do the right things from people and process,
Mm-hmm.
things should fall in place, right? That's the data product and everything coming out of it.
Yeah. Oh man. So it's almost like putting the ownership now back on the person that originated from, right? Instead of it putting it on this algorithm or something that's out there doing the actual learning and all that good stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, do you see this being a problem, like a kickback from the data owners to say, hey, look, I am, or is it that responsibility is it too much for for the data owner?
No, I think this is where the whole notion of the data democracy comes into play, right? Data democracy
Hmm.
is not saying I, as a technology person, I'm not saying because I'm a bigger number. Let's say if
Hmm.
IT is a bigger entity, I'm not saying I should win, or
Yeah.
neither you in a business, and business normally is the bigger component of any enterprise, right? It's not
Hmm.
saying the majority wins here. What the data democracy says is you need to put emphasis to where it makes sense. Meaning, okay, in this example of data mesh, yes, you would see the pendulum swinging from the far end, one end from the right to one end in the left. That's not a good
Right.
thing either, right? Because
Right. Right.
one thing what you said just now is the business domain teams are typically not technically savvy teams,
Hmm.
right? So this is one of the challenges that you could see, or one of the opportunities for improvement you see, is
Hmm.
how do the technical domain teams, which are the engineering teams, the IT teams, how do they work hand in hand with the domain owners so the pendulum doesn't have to be extreme swinging? It could be somewhere in the middle. How do we
Hmm.
come to that point of, I would still use the word inflection, where both the teams feel that there is a level of responsibility? Yes, there is an emphasis to data quality, and the engineering teams are saying, we're going to provide you proper technologies, whether it's technologies like what we have at Right Data, like RDT from a data
Mhm.
quality automation, where it's a platform where the business and the technical teams can come together, right? So they can
Mhm.
start to enforce the rules-driven process
Mhm.
into the tool, and you can consistently apply the rules across the ecosystem, because technology teams don't have the domain knowledge.
Right.
And I think
Right.
people forget that's the strength of the domain owners. They
Mhm.
know their stuff, they
Mhm.
know their data. They can dictate the terms to say, okay, here you are an enterprise A. If I'm in the sales domain, I know as an enterprise A what sales data you would need to make some meaningful analysis at the consumption standpoint, right? It's how do we
Yeah.
bring that collectiveness in the teams? That's the focus. It's not saying, domain owners, now you are tough luck. That should never be the way. Not the way I see it, not the way no one should see it. It's like,
Uh-huh.
how do we hold your hand together? The hand holding is still no different. It's like, how
Mhm.
do we give you a level of ownership, right?
Yeah.
End of the day, it is our data as an enterprise data. We all mean and care for it. How do we get
Yeah.
the value from it? Who is doing what, and how do we support each other? I think that's where the broader emphasis needs to be.
No, I like that because now it's sort of like spreading the love, right?
It is.
Spreading the responsibility, right? The ownership. Sometimes I do worry about, right? We have this whole concept of like responsible AI now, right? This trust the AI or
Mhm.
explainable AI that's out there. And so when you think about that transition from the domain owner all the way to the technology, you
Yep.
know, it almost allows it to be more of a in my head, maybe you can correct me. It just seems like it could be more of a problem to define who is responsible for what
Yep.
when you start spreading it out, right? Like, before, if it's just on the machine, then you can blame the machine or whoever developed that machine. And then, now we're starting to say, well, now the domain owners, right, they're the ones providing the data. And so it could almost trace back to say, look, the responsibility is no longer on this technology individual, the person that built this design algorithm, the model that's out there. It's no longer responsible for it, right? It goes all the way back to say the data owner now has some level of responsibility in there to provide it. And I like that because if you're putting a little bit more pressure on that data owner, the product owner, then they will provide quality data,
Yep.
at the time, right? So I love that.
And I think one more point that comes to my mind in technology or any enterprise, everything is project, project, project,
Hmm.
right? So data as a product, I think this is where I love this, right?
Hmm.
Because a project to a product is a very different mindset, right?
Hmm.
When you look at from the 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 three legs of a stool, the budget, the scope, and the timeline point of view, right,
Hmm.
or prioritization standpoint, this is not changing much,
Hmm.
right? So what we are saying in that perspective is mainly pointing you with a product mindset, you have a vision, you have a strategy, you have a budget, and it doesn't have to be a project which ends in 6 weeks. Most of
Right.
the places, the challenge is everyone means right things. Business constantly evolves, right? Budgets are hard to find. When the budget comes through, the thinking is, I am working on a project. So the
Right.
problem with that statement is projects are very limited in lifetime. They have a very short shell life, right?
Mm.
6 weeks, 3 months. What after then? You build this great solution, you got the budget to build it for 3 months, and after 3 months, there's no more project because the project completed, but the data as a product hasn't completed.
Mm.
Data is still in the in the process of happening. So all of
Yeah.
a sudden, you can put focus to it, because end of the day, it's all about budgets, and it's all about commitments, all about
It's
timelines,
too
all
much
about
pressure.
deliverables.
Yeah.
So when you bring the whole notion of product, now you have a vision, you have a strategy, you can execute the vision. Visions are typically 18 months, right? So the
Hmm.
product, depending on how critical the product, not every data is equal. I'm a strong
Hmm.
believer in that too. But when there is a product that is critical to the company, now you can have a vision, strategy, execution, everything playing. So you
Mhm.
build a complete product as opposed to building a half-baked product which no one can find use to. And that also, I believe strongly, would minimize any and every data duplication, which is a foundational pillar of data democracy.
Man, so what do you do about the data that's already in there, right? I mean, do you how do you handle that, right? I mean, now you introduce this mesh, right?
Yes.
And you have these product owners in there, you have the data owners are involved, they're responsible and all that good stuff, but there's already data in a centralized location.
Yeah.
Do you just overwrite it eventually over time, or I mean, how does that work in your eyes?
So I think that's a great question, right? I think this is probably the question many people have. Methodologies are coming every 3 years, and what do I do
Mm-hmm.
with what I've done? All that you could have done everything back to your point, in a centralized data warehouse. No one's going to preach to tell the business that your business needs to stop today because I'm going to adopt
Right.
into data mesh. That's
That's
great.
true.
That's craziness. So I hope no one says everything you've done is wrong.
Hmm.
It never works, right? Yes, there is always again, let me explain you who what Rama is, right?
Hmm.
I I've never believed in a perfection. I know there is a perfect solution as an utopia never
Hmm.
exists. I never
Hmm.
seen it in my 27 years. Be it me being a C++ developer or me being where I am today. You got to take the fine balance and say, let's take an approach that's kind of common sense, right?
Hmm.
Perfection will happen. Eventual consistency is such a big thing these days in NoSQL big data days, right? Everything is going to be eventually consistent. But how do
Hmm.
you track a consistent approach where you come to a state which is an end state that is stable and acceptable, right?
Yeah.
So to your point, not to belabor what the question was, so you can't just say tomorrow walk in an enterprise saying, oh, you build everything one way, it's all trash, doesn't work,
Wipe
right?
it out.
It is like you take it a baby step. Let's say you have a new product you have to build.
Hmm.
Classic example, greenfield, never had it before. Now take a data mesh as an approach,
Hmm.
right? Or you have some critical assets and you are challenged for data quality. Now
Hmm.
identify, so your end goal is to succeed and to show the business that the data mesh is not a figment of someone's imagination. A data mesh
Hmm.
is a real thing. You can touch and feel it because you get data on the other end of the solution from a consumption, because data mesh is all about consumption analytics, right?
Hmm.
It's about making sure you're able to gain the knowledge from data to get some meaningful information so you can gain as a business, right?
Right, right,
So
right.
in the case of other where you already have data, yes, you can still figure out to continue to work on it, continue to move what you have, while you can shore up the new process in place and build the critical asset simultaneously. So at one point, you would have probably two solutions in play, but that's
Hmm.
going to be the a decision making based on the appetite of an enterprise. How do you approach it? Some enterprises might say, I don't care, just do a complete redo, which,
Right.
okay, there's probably a reason and justification to it,
Hmm.
but I struggle with that notion, right? You just
Hmm.
cannot unplug something. Things were done for a reason. Give it a time. We will build another layer of process to support that,
Hmm.
right? That's my way of taking it. So
No, that's a great point, great approach, great methodology, and I'm glad you were able to explain that because I know that's a common problem out there where they always ask, like you mentioned, what about the current way things are going, right? Do I just wipe everything out? And if they do, then I guess if they're a new company, whatever, then it's always best, of course, to start with a great solid foundation,
yeah.
like the data mesh and in there. But if they're not, then you're trying to introduce this thing. Then it's this layer approach. I like the layered approach that you're mentioning, right? It takes time and patience. I mean, this thing probably could take years of transitioning, over time, depending on how spread out the data, right? Is and the different sources and all that good stuff. So, and what I'm taking from this, data democracy is important because it is improving that decision making,
Yeah.
and the data is accessible now to all employees, right? Which allows the entire organization to make like those comparable and aligned judgments. So I do appreciate you breaking that down. Can you give some examples of data democracy or data democratization, in your mind?
Yeah. So I think the challenge statement, which I called out in my white paper, right?
Hmm.
I think one of the challenges is technology teams are really hard working, right?
Hmm.
Always. There's so much to do, and they're so understaffed in most of places, right? And the priorities are always constantly changing. One challenge you would hear from the business is, or a knowledge leader in the company is, I cannot get access to the data. It takes too long for me to get an access. Why does it
Hmm.
take for me to wait for 3 weeks to get access to some table in some database, right?
Hmm.
Or it's like, okay, I got the data. I don't know how to read it. Man, it's
Hmm.
got fantastic column names. Everything looks great,
Yeah.
but I don't know what the context is, right?
Yeah.
How do I drive into any meaningful knowledge from the data so I can self-service myself, right? And the other thing is, okay, data is here. I don't have a technology at my disposal to go do the right things, right? I don't know. I mean, I thought this was SQL, but it's JSON now. I don't know how to read
Uh-huh.
JSON. Who could teach me? Oh, it's a REST API. I don't know how to read it, right?
Right.
And 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 the other problem is um, the there are multiple copies of data. It
Hmm.
happens in every enterprise, right? People
Hmm.
start to build these data assets,
Yeah.
and data assets grow, and the same asset is five places, five different ways,
Yeah. I see it all
which
the time.
which is the data. So those are the kind of challenges, right? And if you pair it back, either looking it through the lens of data mesh or looking
Hmm.
through the lens of data democracy, both of them are approaching the problem statement in two ways. Data democracy says you need access to the right information at the right time, controls and accesses are needed. And data
Hmm.
mesh says, here are the domain owners. We know what we need, what the enterprise needs from data. I'm going to build them in a way where you, as an end consumer, know how to read it, know how to access it, know how to process it after you access it. Because from an
Hmm.
IT standpoint, now that's the platform collaboration and governance and everything coming play, right? You can't just
Hmm.
explore into the data mesh without architecture principles. That cannot be overlooked, right? What
Hmm.
standards you're going to follow, whether it's going to be a Kimball, right? Whether
Hmm.
it's going to be a normalized approach, whether it's a data vault approach.
Hmm.
There's standard approaches you're going to do, star schema, whatever you want to do, or completely denormalized. Is it a complete virtualization? There is n number of ways to skin the same problem. So
Hmm.
you need to understand, for each of the approaches, do I have the technology available for the domain owners to
Hmm.
make sure they can freely and safely do the job, right? Same
Yeah.
thing. What are the policies, procedures, and standards that are centralized that need to be adopted and applied on the platform? Data quality. Do you need a testing tool like RDT? Or from an engineering standpoint, do you need a tool like Dexter's, which is complete from end to end, right? From ingestion to the consumption and transformation in between. How do you simplify the challenge statement? How do you make it easy for the code deploys, CI/CD? Let's not forget that. The
Hmm.
orchestration. Now you see how technical the space is becoming. But then
Hmm.
how do you make this technical space safe enough for the business domain owners to safely work in it, knowing they got what they need, they have the support they need, and they got the technology teams to back them up to get the job done. See, now it is not no more a simple problem. It's not we saying, like, if you remember my first statement, we're not saying the pendulum swing is going from one end to the other. It's like
Right.
pendulum swing coming somewhere here in the middle.
Yeah.
And how do we enable both sides? How do both sides of the equation, technical, non-technical, will have a equal role to play? That to me is data democratization.
No, that is amazing definition. I love those examples. And those two examples that really stood out to me, right, was that IT ownership kind of model and then that data silo model, right? And when you think about, I mean, just thinking about that data silo model, I mean, it just brings back nightmares with companies that I've worked with, where I was in the company and I'm like, oh man, there's so many copies of this data everywhere, right? It doesn't matter where it is. There's about five plus different copies of it. Now, that's a problem in itself, right? You're trying to search, you're doing searches within your company or within the platform you have. and then you see multiple copies, right? You're like, which one is the right one? Which one is the latest version? Whatever it is. And then the other problem is like the space that we're talking about is taken up, right? You know, something that is a whole nother organization problem, probably the
Yeah.
storage company or something like that. The storage organization, they're like, man, the you know, if it, and especially say if you can't really I guess, you know, dedupe it or something like that, you know, then you're looking at, you know, now you're taking up space that's unneeded, right? You know, and you're paying more money for it. So it always comes back to the business model and stuff, you know. And what I'm hearing from you is that it's not just this technical problem anymore, right? It's a process that you have to be in place, right?
Yeah.
Process have to be in place, and that's important, right? And so those processes can come from all these different organizations, but it has to be in place, right? Even and that solves this technical problem that we're having here,
Yeah.
you know. And so I love everything you said there. That data silo model, or as an example of data democracy, that is important because data is created or collected and stored within like these silo systems for role specific tasks, and it can get crazy. I mean, I have seen craziness happen in an organization, and so I want to dive a little bit deeper, right, into data democracy, right, or democratization, you know, and understanding these pros and cons, right, especially the cons because a lot of people are like, man, this sounds great, but
Yeah.
what can you get yourself into a little bit, you know, as a problem, right? You know, there's some risk in there, I'm assuming, when it comes down to it. Maybe the pros outweigh the cons, but you know, in your head, in your mind, what are your thoughts on that?
I think one challenge I see, which normally gets into how much you can achieve within a data democratization, right? Because if you look at the pillars of data governance, there is metadata management, there is
Mm-hmm,
business rules, there is technical rules, there is lineage, then there is data change management, right? These are all pretty big, right?
mm-hmm,
Now, not every enterprise has the appetite to go solve for everything, right?
mm-hmm,
One lesson I've learned over my many years of working in the data is you need to understand the pulse of the enterprise, the pulse of the audience, or whoever your stakeholders are, and you got to drive the approaches based on it, right? Maybe
mm-hmm,
some places are more willing to put an investment into data architecture,
mm-hmm,
right? Most of the enterprises do, but I've seen places where they put more emphasis on building and developing. Okay, you need to approach the problem differently, but a weak architecture, whether it's solution or data architecture, would only make the solutions less scalable and less tenable, right? We all know it. So one challenge is data democracy is
mm-hmm,
having a good balance, right?
mm-hmm.
And you can go and have a conversation to get the funding or with the teams with the business to say I'm going to model data model everything to death. That's not going to work,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So depending on, again, it goes back to my point of not every data asset is created equal, or not
Mhm.
every data product is created equal. In the same token, you got to figure out what are the data products that are close to you and what are the ones that are more enterprise wide in that point of consumption, right? There could be some assets coming from finance, sales, marketing, and others. They could create tens of data products, but only one or two could be, oh my god, this is it, right? I
Mhm.
got to take care of this with all my life. One, it's more secure, more private, more critical. So you got to do
Mhm.
certain things differently. You got to have a proper solutioning, proper architecting, and you need to make sure from a data quality standpoint, data lineage standpoint, what are the things you have to do, right? The technology stack, like the modern technology stack that we have in right data, Dexterous and all, they come with a way to auto curate information, right?
Mhm.
The the semantics or the actual lineage information is baked into the product, right?
Right. Right.
That's becoming much more prevalent these days. So I
Mhm.
think you need to identify what is that that acceptable criteria you want to adopt,
Mhm.
because data democracy can overwhelm people, right? Because there is
Yeah.
lineage, there is metadata management, there is data modeling, data architecture. All of these, data change management is big again.
Mhm.
So all of these cannot be overlooked. You need to figure out which makes sense, and the others look the other way and don't even do anything about it. right?
Right, right. And I love that, and with that, I just think of one word, right? Patience, right? When you're going through this process, because, it could be a heavy, heavy task or heavy load on the company. It can be overwhelming, right? When you're trying to implement all the processes in place. And, also, like, I love the fact that you mentioned lineage, right? Lineage as being a possible, problem in this aspect, right? Being able to, you think about losing a single source of that data related truth, right?
Yep.
Resulting from like all these different silos and stuff, right? Or as unknown silos is out there, and exposing and shoot. I mean, even I think about like exposing organization to like legal or ethical or privacy
Oh,
concerns,
of course. Yeah.
so that has to be something that is a huge possibility in there. And then, you know, I guess people misinterpreting the data, right? Knowing enough to be dangerous kind of thing, and misinterpreting something like the data and making those bad decisions as a result. It could it could all be, possibilities or cons. So, anyways, all right. So I really I love this topic to death, right? And I wanted to, if you could highlight, one or two strategic steps to forming this data democratization within a company, what would be the ones that you would think of?
I could certainly, myself being a technical guy, an architect, I put a lot of emphasis into data architecture, whether it's data
Hmm.
modeling, or having some proper solution diagrams, right? So you
Hmm.
have a vision and strategy, and how do you align the vision and strategy to a solution diagram that shows you this is how we're going to put that together. Here is a
Hmm.
technology stack, right? And then backing up with a proper data model where not just the technology teams, but now we're going to make it more transparent. We're going to take it to the audience, which is the consumer of the data or the business domain owner, and we're going to show them here is a visual representation of what we're going to put as a solution. Look it
Hmm.
through, and let's have an engaging conversation to help us as technology. Are we going in the right track? We don't want to build, like, remember that representation of a tire swing and what it ends up? That's a classic
Hmm.
representation. So we don't want to go into that place. Yes, some of that can happen still, but bringing in the data democracy as a knowledge sharing, I'm a
Hmm.
big believer of having these as strategic approaches: data model, solution diagram, and review of those solutions before even a line of code can go on the paper.
Hmm. Okay, okay.
Right. And
Now
then
that.
and then the second thing is, how do you simplify the code release process? CI/CD is such a big thing. The 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 change and the change the continuous integration and the continuous deployments, it's still not specific to software, it's specific to data also. How do you simplify
Wow.
the process, right? The code collaboration, the code check-in, the release management, the change management. I think I
Mm.
called out at least five different aspects outside of four aspects outside of architecture. These are all are foundational in my mind. You can't overlook any one.
Yeah, no, no, I mean that's amazing, and I hope the audience is definitely capturing that, because those are tips, when trying to implement these strategies into your organization. Even, yeah, I typically think about, like, where is the data coming from, right? Like that data source mapping. For some reason, that sticks to mind as something that could be very valuable, right? Creating or
Yes.
consulting like this map of that data source. I and that goes back to lineage, I guess, but it's like, where the heck is this data coming from, right? It's coming from, and who, what product or what individual, tracing it all the way back is probably something that is key. And if not key, it's going to be key in the future, So again, thank you for being on the podcast. Now, I love at the end to leave a dope nugget or gem, with the audience. And it's been amazing talking to you. And this really explains what we've learned, right? For me, through our conversation, I've definitely learned that the data quality problem starts at the edge, right? That was amazing when we got to that point, and it was like a light bulb, right? That said, okay, well, and I don't, and honestly, I don't think a lot of organizations implement something like that, and they focus on that edge part of the process. the domains, right? They're the ones who know their data the most. So you sort of trust them to feed the systems, right, with the quality data, and that data democracy improves decision making.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with?
I think the just to keep it simple, I know methodologies come and go, but I think the foundations of data, having a solid architecture,
Hmm.
right? Having a, I would say data quality is probably the biggest pain point in any organization. If you could control that, I could safely say 60 to 70% of the problems would vanish. No
Dang.
one would come ask you for data quality, I mean,
Yeah.
data lineage, because the
Hmm.
business is in such a comfortable place at that point. They know the data is always going to be pristine,
Yeah.
right? You can have more information on hand, but architecture and data quality to me are so pure. I cannot imagine an enterprise operating without those two foundational capabilities, Simon. So,
Yeah. No, you sound like what's his name? Andrew Ng. Is that his
okay.
name? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, because he just did the, well, not just did, but he had this amazing talk on, it's on YouTube now, right? And he was talking about how, the model, right? People are always talking about, oh, I need to change my model to become more accurate, right? All the time. And he said, you know what? If you want the final decision to be more accurate or model to be more accurate, you need to give quality data. All right. And he's like, you need to start further back. And then he actually showed how, changing the quality of the data, whether the data set is small or big, you know, actually helps that model be more accurate or everything to be more accurate. So the decision at the end of the day is more accurate in the long run. So I just thought that was amazing. I was like, he must be listening to Andrew. Yeah,
I'll look
but
it up.
no,
So is it Andrew ING or YOUNG?
actually, Andrew, NG.
Oh,
So
NG.
yeah,
Okay.
Angie,
I'll look it
yeah,
up.
yeah. I can
Uh,
send it to you,
no,
outside. But
please.
yeah, all right. So now for the fun stuff. All right. So now we usually get into a game, as the audience knows, it's called Overrated, Underrated. And this game really talks about, I got it from a mentor of mine, Gary Vee, and it allows the audience to really make a connection with us outside of our geeky lifestyle that we always do, right? We are geeks, we know it, where we love the code, we love technology, we live this thing, we breathe it, but we do think about some of the other stuff, in this world. And so, are you ready for the game?
Right on.
All right. The first topic is cold weather.
It's certainly um, cold weather. I know my problems, so I would certainly not underrate it. It is certainly, it's actually it gets me because I have some issues. So
Yeah. Oh man, I mean, I hate cold weather. I'm a July baby, and I sit there. It bothers me, to the fullest. All right, traveling.
I would say so overrated in some sense because I'm not a big
Oh,
traveler myself. So
hmm.
I'm okay. I mean, on and
You
off when
travel
I
a lot
do
for
it,
the company?
on and off I have to. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, okay. All right. I only say this because you are in ATL, Coca-Cola.
Did I lose you there? Is it my connection or your connection, Bobby?
Oh, did you hear me?
Yeah, you're okay. Your video froze up, so I don't know.
Oh, it did? Oh, sorry about that. I was saying
Yeah,
Coca. Can you hear me now?
I
Oh,
can
I
hear
don't know
you.
what's
Yeah.
going on. Oh, here we go. There we go. Okay. Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola. Um, they're just where they are. I mean,
Hmm. Hmm.
they're in the right
No,
place.
so, yeah, I mean, I don't drink Coca-Cola that much. I only say that because you're in Atlanta and they said that that's where it started. It's the big thing and stuff.
I
Uh,
I don't drink sodas as much, so but I
okay.
still think Atlanta isn't where it needs to be. Let me put it that
Yeah.
way. We
Yeah.
love
All
Coke.
right. All right. The printer.
I cannot live without it, so it's certainly not underrated.
Really? Do you use the
I
printer?
Trust me. I mean, I have my paper. I'm a paper guy. I got to see it. Not, I
Uh-huh.
don't print everything, but the things that I really need to keep it in here in my head, I
Hmm.
read them at least a few times. So I still am a big book guy. I buy books like crazy.
Uh-huh.
I mean, every
So
book
you're
I
big
see,
on hardcover books.
I love them. Hard, soft, it
Okay.
doesn't matter. I buy
Hmm.
it. I read it at least once. That's my
Okay.
passion.
Okay.
So
All right. Pizza.
actually, I have one at home, so it's certainly not underrated. My kids are having it for lunch now. So
No, that's definitely good for the kids. And every once in a while, I like to dabble in it myself, you know.
I'm going to have
Uh,
it after after this conversation. So
all right. Pizza. I mean, not pizza, sorry, watches.
I am a big fan of watches. I got 3 or 4 of them. I wear them.
Uh-huh.
The old, not the digital kind, the old analogs like the Swisses,
Oh,
like the Movados and stuff like that. Yeah, I love them.
okay, okay. All right. And the last one, the desktop.
I think I still use a version of it in some way. Actually, I'm
Uh-huh.
on a standing desk with a
Uh-huh.
monitor right there and a laptop in front of me. Good days, but I think with everything that's happened with the cloud storage, yeah, it
Yeah.
was natural. It was just a progression that was waiting to happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, I know at one point with GPUs and all that stuff starting to be pretty big, right? Resources starting to get bigger, you need terabyte hard drives and all that crap. Then it started to get to a point where we would we wanted to um get I would keep I had a desktop, right? Because that was the only thing that can handle it. But now like laptops, they can do it all as well. You know, I love laptops, or mobile devices. They're starting to implement all that. I mean, they got
Yeah.
GPUs in like iPhones and stuff, now. So they're, it's
True.
getting crazy.
Which is true. I mean, it's not even 15 years ago, which a desktop was such a big thing, right?
Yeah.
And 16 meg used to be, oh my God, man, you got 16 meg of memory? I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, I do. I'm like, okay. But now that's like 16 meg
Yeah.
probably can't even process a one JSON file. I mean, so, so
Right, right,
anyway.
right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you being on the podcast. Audience, thank you all for listening to Data is My Science podcast, the show that makes data a passion. I'm your host again, Dapper Data. We love you all. Where can they reach you at? And is there anything that you're promoting right now?
Yes. So getrightdata.com, or you could look up on LinkedIn, Right Data. And
Mhm.
then there's two things in focus for us. There is a conference coming up in Orlando at TDWI. We'd love to see you there. We have a sponsorship. And then we have our second event coming up in December in Washington, D.C. It's focusing on data governance and data quality. Plus, there's a few other events locally here. But thank you, Bobby, again for having me here on this podcast. Thank you, audience, for listening in. Hopefully, whatever the information I shared, you would find it useful. And I look forward to many more. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being on the podcast. Audience, as you know, you can always follow me at Mr. Dapper Data or any one of the social media platform, and a link in the bio will direct you to my podcast as well. Definitely subscribe to the Data is My Science podcast on YouTube. Definitely tune in on the multiple audio links as well. I love you all. Peace. Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a